found in Matthew chapter 5, verses 1 to 12. And I'd like to read that to you now, and you can follow along before Russell comes this morning. So the reading's from Matthew 5, 1 to 12. One day, as he saw the crowds gathering, Jesus went up to the mountainside and sat down. His disciples gathered around him, and he began to teach them. God blesses those who are poor in spirit and realizes their need for him, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. God blesses those who mourn, for they will be comforted. God blesses those who are humble, for they will inherit the whole earth. God blesses those who hunger and thirst for justice, for they will be satisfied. God blesses those who are merciful, for they will be shown mercy. God blesses those whose hearts are pure, for they will see God. God blesses those who work for peace, for they will be called the children of God. God blesses those who are persecuted for doing right, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. God blesses you when people mock you and persecute you and lie about you and say all sorts of evil things against you because you are my followers. Be happy about it. Be very glad, for a great reward awaits you in heaven. And remember, the ancient prophets were persecuted in the same way. Amen.
In 1988, that book that you can see up on the screen, that's the cover, it's called Anybody Can Be Cool, but Awesome Takes Practice. That was written as a Christian devotional for teenagers, okay? And Lorraine Peterson, who wrote the book, wanted, she said, to set teenagers free from the lies that they were inferior to others, that they needed to feel the pressure of peers to conform in order to gain approval, to set them free to express themselves as they truly were, as God had designed them in order to be awesome, to live an awesome life. Now, I've never read the book, okay, but I did read some book reviews. Let me read to you what some of the teenagers who read the book had to say. For years I struggled with meager coolness until I read this book. Now with my newfound knowledge and my I Am Awesome t-shirt, all the ladies want to get with me. It may look like they're just laughing and pointing, but I know they truly find me irresistible. It gets worse. When I was a senior in high school, I was the big man on campus. I was worshipped by the students and faculty alike. And the campus female population openly lusted after me. I truly was cool. There was no denying that. I would say, quite humbly, that perhaps I was the coolest person in the universe. I easily gained admission into the university college of my choice, and I look forward to beginning a reign of coolness on yet another campus. But when I reached university, I was in for quite a surprise. It seemed that to be successful and popular in college just wasn't enough to be simply cool. Even the epic level of coolness that I had achieved failed to raise an eyebrow from the most mundane college students. So, I immediately searched Amazon.com, which is what you do, for some sort of devotional book that would help me in this difficult situation. And thankfully, Anybody Can Be Cool, but Awesome Takes Practice was the #1 search result. I promptly bought that book. This book changed my life. With Lorraine's guidance, I was able to elevate myself above coolness into awesomeness. There you go. Need to read the book. Okay, as I said, I've never read the book, and after reading those reviews, I promise you, I will not read that book. But, as interesting and catchy as the title is, it sort of did connect with me. As I was meditating, wrestling with this passage of the Sermon on the Mount, the beatitudes, which is the opening statements of Jesus' sermon, this title just connected with me because I saw what Jesus is trying to do. I saw, in a sense, Jesus is calling ordinary people to be great people. Jesus teaches that greatness is possible and we must aim for it. His sermon starts by listing 8 characteristics of people that God praises. That's what he means when he says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the meek." What's Jesus saying? What does that mean, blessed? Or in the New Living Translation, which Lorne read, it was God blesses. What does that mean? Well, we often say we bless God. You're at Psalm 103. Bless the Lord, O my soul. What are we doing? We're praising God. We admire qualities in God which we say are worthy of our praise, and we give him honor and praise for those admirable qualities. And all that's happening here is the reverse. When Jesus says, "Blessed are," he's saying, God blesses you. God thinks these qualities, such and such people, are praiseworthy. They stand out to him. In his estimation, they ought to be congratulated. They are the people he honors. They are the people he values. They are the people he will reward. It's like an honors list. I mean, some here in this congregation are teachers. And annually, there is an awards ceremony. There's a night at the end of the year where students are called up to the platform because of some achievement, standout achievement, or some admirable quality. It could be they achieved first in science, or they were helpful to the school community. They were the most helpful student. And they receive an award, and everybody claps, congratulates them. They receive a certificate, or in some situations, maybe even a prize or a reward, like a voucher or a book. What are we doing? We're saying, as a school community, this is what we value, this is what we admire, and we want to congratulate the effort put in and the result obtained. We value this. We think this is worthy of praise. And it reflects a lot upon the values of school communities, what we hand out awards for. Well, these beatitudes, these 8 blessings, this is God's award list, his honors list. These are the people that God is saying, I congratulate them, I praise them, I honor them, and I will reward them. Have a look, for example, at the second one. He says, "Blessed are those who mourn." God is saying, mournful, grieving people are people who I congratulate and praise, and they will be rewarded. Or blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. I admire them, I praise them, I honor them, and I will reward them. And what's the reward? They will be satisfied. They will be fulfilled. They will have what they hunger and thirst for. Or blessed are the poor in spirit, the first one. They will be rewarded with the kingdom of heaven. I so congratulate them. I so praise them. I will not only honor them, but I will reward them with the kingdom of heaven. So it's God's honors list. Now, why does Jesus give us a list of 8 characteristics that God honors and rewards? Surely it's because Jesus is teaching and expecting his audience, his disciples, to aim to be such people. He's expecting them to say, that's who I have to be. There's no point otherwise in listing them. And that's why he gives us beforehand what the honors list, what God is looking for, what God wants from people, what he praises, what he values, and what he will reward. And in case you think this is optional and not mandatory, you need to read the Sermon on the Mount, because as far as Jesus is concerned, he expects it from all his disciples. He's teaching his disciples, this is what you must aim for. You must aim to be such people who will be honored by God and rewarded by God. And here is the list of what God's looking for. In case you're not convinced that this is not optional but compulsory, if you have a Bible, turn to Matthew chapter 5, verse 20. Let me read it to you. Jesus says, unless your righteousness, that is, your right character and conduct, your right living, is better than the righteousness of the teachers of the religious law and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Now, in our day, we think, oh, that's a cinch. Religious leaders and Pharisees of Jesus' day, they were rotten people. They're nasty, mean-spirited, selfish people. But be careful. We're living on this side with years and years of interpretation and views about the Pharisees. There's actually been books written trying to recover the image of the Pharisees because we so see them as nasty people who are responsible for Jesus' death that we're actually not getting a good picture of what the Pharisees were like when Jesus said this. These people were very devoted, religious, devout, pious people who took seriously honoring God in their daily life, who prayed regularly, who studied the scriptures studiously, who gave money to the poor, helped good causes. Charity was high on their agenda. They were seriously devout religious people. Yes, they were selfish, and they covered their selfishness with religious practices, but they were very devout, very pious. And Jesus is saying, of course, the greatness of my people, my students, must be better than this. That not only do I expect them to be devoted to the scriptures, not only do I expect them to pray regularly, because he teaches about prayer and scriptures, not only do I expect them to obey the precepts, but they must not use this to cover a bad heart, a selfish heart. It has to be better. They have to aim higher. And to convince you even further, Jesus wants us to aim for greatness, to aim for what God considers awesomeness is. Consider Matthew chapter 5, verse 46 to 48. Let me read it to you. If you love those who love you, what reward is there for that? Even tax collectors do that much. If you're kind only to your friends, how different are you from anyone else? Pagans do that. But you are to be perfect. Do you hear that? You are to be perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. Now, in the sentences before that statement, perfection for Jesus is being just like your Father, who loves even his enemies, who shows grace and kindness even to the unjust, to those who are constantly, day by day, contradicting him, opposing him, seeking to undermine his will and his work in the earth. And he says that's the sort of perfection, that's the sort of greatness I'm looking for from my people, from my followers. Now, if Jesus is training his followers to aim for greatness, the greatness that God honors and rewards, then he must believe it's possible. You see, there's been a lot of discussion and debate about the Sermon on the Mount saying, oh, this is all very idealistic. Loving your enemies, blessing people who curse you and despise you and hate you. Dealing with wicked sexual fantasies, in such a violent way. All these rules, these laws, these teachings of Jesus, they're impossible. They're just idealistic. They're too perfect. That can't be the right way to interpret the Sermon on the Mount. Sure, they're perfect. They're very high standards. But Jesus is teaching ordinary people who's gathered around him and saying, now this is my way. And it's my way or no way. You follow my way. You do what I say. Or you don't enter into the kingdom of heaven. So he must believe this is possible to live this way. Otherwise he wouldn't be requiring it of his disciples. And he reinforces that in Matthew chapter 7 at the close of his sermon. Not everyone who calls out to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. Only those who actually are doing the will of my Father will enter. Anyone who listens to my teaching and follows it is wise, like a person who builds a house on a solid rock. Though the rain comes in torrents and the floodwaters rise and the winds beat against that house, it won't collapse because it was built on bedrock. It was built on the foundation of Jesus' word, his instructions and his directions. And you see, he's saying you've actually got to build on it. It's not just enough hearing it. I want you to build on it. And the person, the man or woman who builds on, who actually erects their life, lives according to this, is building on solid foundation and will not only withstand the trials and difficulties and the tests of this life, but will withstand the ultimate judgment of God and not be demolished. Now, greatness requires qualities that appear to be the opposite of what we would expect. The reviewers of that book, Anybody Can Be Cool, But Awesome Takes Practice, showed a typical understanding of human greatness. I mean, it was all about appearance, attractiveness. Whether as a guy, you're good looking and really attract the attention of women, whether you're intelligent, whether you're talented, whether you're gifted. That was their idea of greatness, and I think it's a great shame that Christian devotional created that sort of concept of what it means to be awesome. But what if true greatness was something quite different to what we normally think and believe? What if true greatness does not come from raising our own profile, from raising ourselves to be the center of attention, but instead, true greatness comes from receiving and responding to the greatness of someone else, to someone who actually deserves to be the center of attention in all our activity. And I think that's the key to understanding the Beatitudes and the Sermon on the Mount. Let me make this a little bit clearer. It's not difficult to see that human greatness that Jesus describes in the Beatitudes consists of 8 blessings that are quite opposite to what you would normally expect. Most of us would not think that say, I'm spiritually bankrupt, I'm spiritually inadequate and needy, was a real sign of greatness. Not many of us think to be really sorrowful and grieving over loss, that I don't have it, I've lost it, I haven't got what it takes. We wouldn't say, oh, that's greatness. Not many of us would think to be really meek and gentle is a sign of true greatness, or to hunger and thirst for righteousness. Now, that's not high on, the Australian Idol list. So, what's going on here? Help to understand it. What we need to do is realize what Jesus is truly doing here. He's not talking about the greatness that people produce out of themselves. He's talking about the greatness of people who are reacting to, responding to someone who's much greater than themselves, who's much more awesome than they had ever imagined. These are the qualities of people who really get who Jesus is and what the kingdom's about, and they're responding to it. It's changing them. It's turning their world upside down. It's turning their whole way of thinking inside out. It's the reaction of people to the kingdom of God, to God with us, who is Jesus, the man who is God. You see, it's all about reversal. Most commentators have said, yeah, look, this is reverse order. It's not what we expected. But many aren't pointing out that it's the reversal that occurs from a really fundamental role swap in your life. Okay? Now, for example, we have it today. People talk about swapping roles, like in the family. Husband previously thinks he's the breadwinner, he swaps the role, and the wife becomes the breadwinner. There's a sense in which Jesus is describing people here who've made a fundamental, profound, radical role swap. They're letting God be their God, and they're swapping the role. They're taking on being the servant, the follower. Jesus is their God. Before we read those first 12 verses, there was a section we didn't read. You find it at the end of chapter 4. And it's a summary statement of what Jesus was preaching about. Matthew simply says he went about, like John the Baptist, saying, repent, for the kingdom of heaven has arrived, or is near, or is drawing near. We're not quite sure how to translate, but we think it's repent, for the kingdom of heaven is drawing near, is arriving. That was the summary statement of Jesus' teaching. So if you wanted to put it in one statement, that's what Jesus was regularly teaching. He was known for teaching that major theme. But what kingdom had arrived? Where was this kingdom? It certainly was the kingdom that many of the Jews were expecting. It's clearly, the more you study the life of Jesus, the kingdom is the fact that God is with them. Jesus has arrived, and he is the first installment of the kingdom. And here, quickly in this sermon, he's asserting his authority. He's giving out directions. He's saying, you want to know what God values? I will tell you what God values. You listen to me. I know. I have the inside knowledge. You follow my directions if you really want to impress God and be awesome to God. And people either react violently to Jesus and saying, this man's a liar, or he's crazy, or recognize this truly is the Son of God speaking to me. And according to Jesus, when we swap these roles, when we let Jesus be our teacher, when we let Jesus be our Lord, when we truly, really surrender to Jesus as master, these qualities are the description of what happens, the transformation, the great character change, the great role reversal that occurs in our life. People are profoundly changed when they understand who Jesus is and receive him as he is. Let me show you what I mean. Take the second beatitude in verse 4. God blesses those who mourn, for they will be comforted. What are they grieving over? They're grieving over how sick and dysfunctional is their world and their own selves, in view of how healthy and functional is the worldview that Jesus is presenting in his preaching on the kingdom. In Jesus, they're doing a comparison and realizing, compared to Jesus, compared to the reality he's presenting, compared to the love and the grace and the truth that he's teaching, that he's displaying and exhibiting, we are one sick, dysfunctional people. The world he's talking about is like from another planet. This is totally new. This is radically different to what we've ever known. Remember what John said, who was so close to Jesus? You know, he ate with Jesus, walked with Jesus, became the one that Jesus really loved. And he said, you know, we got the law from Moses, but from Jesus, he was full of truth and grace. It was just pouring out of him. It had such an impact on John. And so people who realize that, people who truly value Jesus as the fount of wisdom, as the source of knowledge, as the one who truly displays the grace and the power of God, they realize, hey, we're one sick, dysfunctional bunch of people. We are so unhealthy. We grieve over what sin has done us. We mourn over how sin robs us of the glory of God. We're full of sorrow over what sin has done to our world, what we could have been. Jesus is showing us, and look at what we are. In Jesus, we not only see the glory of God, we see the glory of a man, a human being, of what we truly should be like. And we realize how far we've fallen short of that glory. And so we mourn. It's a reaction to the greatness of Jesus revealing God and what man should be. So you just don't understand the Sermon on the Mount. You don't understand the Beatitudes if you think this is what we are to produce out of ourselves. Rather, you understand the Sermon on the Mount and the Beatitudes correctly if you realize these are the things that happen when you truly respond to the glory and the greatness of Jesus Christ. Now, therefore, when you get that, you realize why he starts with that first Beatitude. That the pursuit of greatness begins with acknowledging our own insignificance and inadequacy. And that's where Jesus starts. He said, God blesses those who are poor and realize their need for him. The more accurate translation is, blessed are the poor in spirit. And that word for poor is abject poverty, in dire need. So, he's saying, blessed are those who in their spirit, in their heart, have a deep sense of dire need. They realize they're spiritually destitute. They realize they're spiritually bankrupt. Why do they see themselves like that? Because in Jesus, as I've said, they see the glory and the perfection of greatness, of human greatness, not just divine greatness, but also of human greatness. They see the riches of his wisdom, his wise choices, the love and kindness and compassion of his heart, the way he responds to wickedness, the way he deals with insults and injury and offenses against his person. They have such a view of Jesus, it's like what happened to Isaiah. Remember, for those of you who know the Old Testament passage, Isaiah chapter 6, Isaiah describes what happens to him when he sees the glory of God in the temple. Now, the fascinating thing is that in the Gospels, one of the Gospel writers, I think it's John, I can't remember for sure, but one of the Gospel writers said that Isaiah saw Jesus. He's talking about the glory of what he saw of the pre-incarnate Jesus. But let's not get that too complicated. Let's not get carried away with that. But one of the things is when Isaiah truly saw how powerful God is, how great he was. There was something that was being revealed to him in that image where he realized who he was really doing with. He said, I'm undone. I'm a dead man. I'm dead meat. I'm just undone. How can I ever be great compared to this great God? And think about Peter. Remember, he's in the boat. And it gets into his head. And he realizes who Jesus is when he sees the power he displays. And after listening to the words coming out of his mouth. And he said, depart from me, Lord. I'm a sinner. You see, that's where it starts. That's where it has to start. If there's going to be a true role reversal where you stop being in control, in charge, managing your life, pretending to do the church things, going through the performances, but when you start really being in charge of your life and truly handing it over to Jesus, not just once, today, tomorrow, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, every day, continually handing it back to Jesus, you're going to have to truly believe you're inadequate and insignificant. You need greatness, and that greatness doesn't come from you. It comes from worshiping and following and serving the one who is much greater than yourself. We're all very needy people. And we need to understand that the Christian life, the genius of the Christian life, is that God is offering his best to us. And his best comes in the commitment of Jesus Christ to saving you. The giving of himself, all that he has at your disposal to save you and to help you to become the great person you can become. You see, the mistake that the teenagers made was they thought awesomeness was already inherent in themselves. They just had to plug into it. That's wrong. Totally goes against what Jesus is preaching here. He's saying awesomeness really, you're ready for awesomeness, you're ready for greatness when you realize I'm your source of greatness. I'm your supply of greatness. You have to plug into me. You have to root into me. You'll see it time and time again repeated in the New Testament. Paul will say, I am crucified with Christ, yet I don't live. I live by faith in the Son of God. Christ lives in me. I'm a dependent, needy man who begs daily for Jesus, relies totally on Jesus. We talk about welfare dependency. He says, I have Jesus dependency. I totally live out of my dependency on Jesus. So that I no longer live. I live by faith in him. I live by total reliance on him. That's what faith's about. Or he goes on to say in Colossians, as you have received Christ as Lord, so be rooted in him. Okay? Drawing from him. So you get rid of all this sense of self-sufficiency, of adequacy for the task. Let me illustrate. This Tuesday, I'm giving the guys a heads up. Tuesday the 14th, Valentine's Day, okay? I had promised Linda I would give her flowers. She loves flowers. Linda knows I think flowers are quite useless. I can't see the point of flowers, but I honor my wife and I'm happy to give her cut flowers. But I can see the sense of plants. You see, you can put a plant in the ground and it not only just produces flowers for this week, it can produce flowers for next week and next month and in the year later. It keeps growing. It produces more fruit and more flowers. To me, plants planted in soil make a lot of sense. Flowers, cut flowers, they look nice for a week, then the following week they stink. But some of us are like cut flowers. Okay? We look okay for a while. And we keep up the appearance. But we are not drawing from Jesus. We're not regularly dependent. We don't have a strong sense of total reliance upon Jesus like a plant. And that's what Paul's saying in Colossians. Be rooted in Jesus. You've got to be drawing your adequacy, your sufficiency, your power, your knowledge, your wisdom from constant interaction, daily interaction with Jesus. That would cure your prayerlessness if you really believe that. That would cure your lack of study of the scriptures if you truly believe that. Because you would be saying, I need to know. I have to understand him. I have to think like him, feel like him. I need him to speak into my life regularly. When we realize this, we're ready for greatness with Jesus. Just let me close with making a suggestion of 8 steps for greatness. Because it's something that has to be practiced. The Sermon on the Mount is for practice. Now, I hate saying 8 steps for greatness, because every day I receive from America, from various Christian websites, 10 ways to make a great church, 5 ways to make your sermons more powerful, 3 ways to be a dynamic Christian, 6 ways to cure all the problems and ills of your life. Like, it's just unbelievable. And I'm just waiting for the next set of 10 or set of 8 or set of 6, steps for the formula to live a fantastic, sin-free, wonderful life. But the only reason I'm talking about 8 steps is because that's what the beatitudes are. There's a sense in which they are a list of the characteristics of people who truly are reacting and responding to Jesus. But there is a sense of progression through these. And they do provide you with a starting point. You start with acknowledging you're inadequate. Okay? You start with acknowledging you are really needy. And that's the best place to start. Jesus said that, I've come to heal the sick and the dysfunctional. It's because you think you aren't that you're not getting the benefit. So start with recognizing poverty of spirit. And it doesn't take long to realize how dysfunctional and sick you really are. If you truly would, compare yourself to Jesus. A lot of people think they're okay because they compare themselves to everyone else. But compare yourself to Christ and you realize how needy you truly are. And then mourn over it. Take it to heart. Don't just think, oh yeah, I'm a bad boy. I'm pretty corrupt. No. Weep over it. God weeps over it. God is brokenhearted over sin. God is full of feeling. You think you have feelings? You have nothing like God feels. God feels righteous anger. God feels terrible, heartbroken sorrow over what sin is doing to us. If you don't care, you won't care. Like, you won't live this life if you don't care. If it doesn't matter to you. So many people just sit and think, oh yeah, that was a good sermon. They don't care. If you want to start functioning, feeling, you've got to feel the depth of what God feels when He sees what sin is doing to us. And that stirs you into action. And then, meekness, the third step. Hand over the authority to Jesus. That's what meekness is about. The meek man, the meek woman is somebody who's saying, I will submit to the authority and power of Jesus. He will take charge of my life, both the good and the bad. The consequences of my obedience, they're all in His hands. I'm not going to try and work it out. I'm not going to try to control people, manipulate situations, do the politicking, the lobbying to try and put myself in a good position. I'm just going to do what Jesus says and leave the consequences with Him. And sometimes I will be unpopular. Sometimes I might lose my job. Sometimes people are going to speak ill against me, and I'm not going to worry about what they're saying down the corridors. I'm just focusing that Jesus is in charge. He'll work it out. Fourthly, cultivate a hunger and thirst for righteousness. Have a passion for what God is bringing into this world. A righteous order, a new way of life. Do you really want to become the great person, the great people? One of the things that really worries me and troubles me is when we start to settle for mediocrity. Or, mediocrity becomes the key into many churches. Like, hey, we do church, we do life together group, we do singing, that's good. Get a little bit of a buzz on Sunday, and then we go back to mediocrity. We've got to be constantly improving. You have every right to come to me and say, Russell, have you actually changed at all in the past year? And if I say no, then you say, get back to the Sermon on the Mount, get going. Because if I'm to lead, I should be growing. I should be changing. I should be developing, hungry to become better and better in the image of Jesus. Fifthly, be full of mercy, because we're going to have a lot of patience and forgiveness if we're really going to take the Sermon on the Mount seriously. There are going to be so many mistakes, so many errors. But in the taking on what Jesus is saying, putting on the new way of life and putting off the old, we have to show incredible forgiveness and mercy towards one another. Sixthly, develop a faithfulness to God, which Jesus describes as purity. Be honest with God. Stop pretending before God. Don't conceal what God knows is going on in your life and in your heart. Honesty is the best policy, always with God and with each other. And don't sleep with the enemy. Seventhly, work on relationships. Blessed are the peacemakers. Relationships are the stuff of life, Jesus is saying. So build relationships, repair relationships. If you have wronged somebody, if you have injured them, you go and put it right. Repair them for the sake of Jesus, not for your sake, not because it's in your interest to repair it, But he says we do this for his sake, for his glory. And eighthly, and I think this is just at the end of Jesus. I don't think it's actually a quality like the others. I think he's saying in the eighth one, blessed are those who persecute. He's simply saying, when you're doing this, when you're trying to practice greatness with me, and you get into trouble, don't worry about it. Laugh, rejoice. You're not in trouble. You know, it's a great comfort to hear that sometimes, because we are so worried about being in trouble. And Jesus is saying here, when you're in trouble because you're practicing what I'm telling you to practice, don't worry. You're not in trouble. You're not in trouble with God. So rejoice. If you're not in trouble with God, you're in no trouble, no matter what other people say. So, there's a path set out for us in these Beatitudes as we go into the Sermon on the Mount. We're going to be doing this sermon over the next few weeks, probably actually to the end of March. And that's going to be an excellent opportunity for us to be talking, thinking, how do we practice this? There's only so much you can cover in a sermon. You've been very patient in listening to me today. But the actual practice of these things requires a lot of discussion and working it out together. And I'm actually going to give, we've got a little bit of time before we close, I'm actually going to give maybe 5 or 10 minutes. You may have a question you'd like to ask, because sometimes you can only sort of cover generalities in a sermon. There might be something specifically that you'd like to home in on. And that's all going to depend on whether our roaming microphone is operational or not. Beg your pardon? Or our voices, yeah. Or we can always do this. Use this one. So does anyone want to ask a question? Yes. Yes. And this is a good question, because for some of you, you may have picked up, wow, you're saying you seem to be suggesting that we go back to working again. Salvation. I thought it was just by faith. I just received salvation as a gift. And I think that's a misunderstanding of the gospel that's being spread a lot today. Salvation is not by your efforts alone. When you hear that phrase, by works alone, I think a better one would be by your efforts alone. It's not by your efforts alone, but it is not without your efforts. There is no salvation without your efforts. You must understand that. Otherwise, the Sermon on the Mount makes no sense. Because Jesus is the one who's saying, you've got to do this or you don't get into the kingdom. But we thought, hang on, that's playing with my mind. No, it's because the way we understand grace. Many are too simplistic. We think grace is just being forgiven. We're forgiven for all our sins. And that is a gift. God doesn't have to forgive us, and He's the only one who can forgive us. So that is the grace gift of God. Nothing you do, it's what Jesus has done, can give you such forgiveness. All right? But there's more to the gospel than forgiveness. There's life with Jesus. There's life with God. And we're not just going to be in heaven as forgiven people, but living exactly the way we've always lived. There's the new birth. There's the gift, the grace of God giving His Spirit. God giving Himself in commitment to walk with us, live with us, lead us. Again, that requires the effort of receiving, of actually letting the Spirit of God lead. If you resist the Spirit of God, you're not receiving, you're not trusting in Him, and you're not obeying Him. And then there is the effort of actually doing what Jesus says, to grow. And yes, it's a progressive thing. There's clearly a progressive thing. And will we attain it? Yes. In this life? No, we're told we won't attain in this life. But will we make progress? Yes, because even Paul said, I am not what I once was. Do you hear that? I'm not what I once was. I used to hate people. I went out killing them. I'm not that anymore. I'm a compassionate man. I'm full of the mercy and grace towards people. I've changed. And I'm still changing. But not only and he says, I put even more effort. The fact that God was working with me, the fact that Jesus was going to help me, I put in more effort that I might keep growing. You see, some of us have almost created a gospel where we think we don't have to do anything. No. You have to keep responding to the grace of God, Paul says, do not receive the grace of God in vain. That is, God's offering, I'll help you, I'll save you, I'll change you, I'll teach you, and we're just not listening. We're not doing, we're not responding. And Paul says you could receive the grace of God in vain. It's being offered, but you're not taking. Does that answer your question? Yeah. So salvation is not by your efforts alone, but it's not without effort, and your effort is always responding. It's never, you don't give forgiveness, you receive it. You don't have the wisdom, you receive it from Jesus. Even the ability to love people comes from receiving the love of God in your own heart. The ability to forgive people is because you've received it. It's always responding to what God gives. Thanks, Kim. Any other questions? Ashley. That's okay. Yeah, what little steps? Yeah. Fantastic question. Because that is the danger. Many times we hear, oh yeah, that sounds good, but it actually happens with small changes now, which you've intentionally got to do. So I do expect Jesus wants you, when reading his sermon, being provoked by his words, to think, okay, I've got to respond. What's my response going to be? First step, I think, is to meet with Jesus. There's no doubt. And as I was studying for this sermon, it hit me. Gee, how self-sufficient have I become again? Where I think, yeah, I'll read the text, I know the passage, preach the message. What a self-sufficient, arrogant idiot I am. So dropping on my knees saying, I'm sorry, I'm doing it again, Lord. I don't know what you really want to say to these people. I don't have the answers. I need to hear from you. I need you to speak to me through this passage as I'm listening. You need to speak and help me to understand what you want to say. And I think we daily have to walk with Jesus. I think that's the first step. We have to really own the fact that we are like cut flowers. Without the water, without the Spirit, without God's input, we are going to die. And some of us are trying to go on the strength of like a couple of minutes with Jesus last week. It's not going to work. You'll never grow. You have to have that sort of dependency of really bringing Jesus into your everyday life, even every hour. Charles Spurgeon, the great preacher, he said, I can't go without an hour without praying to God. Where I have to have God leading me, helping me. Even when I don't hear him, I'm still asking. See? And then I think the second thing, you're right, it's not just we do it on our own. You cannot do these things on your own. Because learning how to be merciful and practicing mercy, even understanding what does it mean to hunger and thirst for righteousness, what does that look like? We sit here, we talk about it, we're interacting, trying to get a better grip and grasp on it. We help each other. That's what Jesus has said. We're to do Christian life together as people. So you're right. What worries me is that some people are not connected to any other Christian who asks them honest questions. And that would be a second step, is to have someone, whether it be your husband or wife, your father or your mother or your friend or some other Christian, who you actually want them to ask you a question. How are you really going in working out these issues? What did you do about that sermon last week? I had a friend like that. He was the most annoying friend I had. His name is Ian. Every week. So, what have you done about it? Oh, irritated me. No end. But he was a great buddy. He actually provoked me to do something. Yeah. Does that? Okay. Oh, yes. Okay, thank you. The question was, if we're to aim for greatness, what should we be thinking of in terms of what we're for? Should it be to be trying to think what would Jesus say or what would Jesus do, or do we take into account, our own situation, our own abilities, and try to develop that? Both. First of all, the image that we are to be conformed to is Jesus. So that I found, we've said that, we know that, but gee, when you think about it, that's really helpful. Because when I was growing up as a Christian, I had images of what I had to be like that were very not like Jesus, even though they're in the church. I had people who were really judgmental, really fastidious about whether or not I brought my Bible to church, whether I didn't do any work or things on Sundays, whether I watched this sort of film or didn't watch this film, and who would absolutely rouse at me if I drank alcohol or went to a dance. Like, I had all these views. That's what it really means to be a really sincere Christian. And they're holy people. They're really righteous people. And then I thought, hang on, but they're not like Jesus. They're very different. They talk a lot about the Bible. They preach a lot to me, but they're not looking like Jesus. So I think it's really important, because you tend to conform to the personality of your church or your lead pastors. You really got to conform to your senior pastor. Jesus has to be the model for us all, for me, for all of us. And his way, his values, his likes, his dislikes have got to color and shape everything. But we're like an orchestra, right? Where Jesus is the conductor. And I've used this analogy before. Some of us are trombones, some of us are flutes, some are violins. The way in which you respond to Jesus is going to be your own personal way, because he says you have to love me from your heart, not Russell's heart. So the way I show love to Jesus could look very different. There will be things that are very similar where we overlap, but there'll be other things that you can do that I can't do. Some people in the church are incredibly thoughtful about others. They just think about the needs of others and even know what that person needs. I'm hopeless at that. But I get help from people who are like that. They teach me, they train me. So I've got to think about that and what their needs are. Some of us are good talkers. That's my gift. I communicate. I can help others learn how to communicate. But you see, we've all got to, in a sense, do it from our abilities and in our worlds, because some of you are in good family situations, some of you are in not so good family situations, some of you are in really difficult workplaces, some of you are in easy workplaces. Working out how you respond to Jesus has to be your own. But he has to be your model and your image. And then as a church, we're actually learning from each other about what that means to respond to him. But he sets the standard. He's the benchmark. And that's very helpful. When I was witnessing to people, they used to say to me, but I live by the golden rule. I don't need to go to church. I'm not hurting anybody. I'm loving my neighbor as myself. And I said, but are you like Jesus? Can you honestly say you are exactly like Jesus? Because if you're not, you're in deep trouble. Because that's God's benchmark. But none of us here today are exactly like Jesus. That's why we've accepted the gracious offer of Jesus, that he says, come under my custody, care, and control. I'll take responsibility for you, but the cost is you give up everything. You're mine. That's the bargain. Okay. All right, we're going to close there. Thank you. Next week, we'll try and do again a little bit more interaction to allow for specifics. So if you've got questions on the passage that's about to follow the Beatitudes, you can think about it beforehand. Thanks, Lorne.